Hello, welcome to the Yellow Submarine, your dedicated Beatle channel. Please make sure to like the video, hit subscribe, and turn on the post notification bell to get notified whenever we release a new video. Ed Sullivan was a television personality who hosted the well-known Ed Sullivan Show and once featured the Beatles for the first time in America. So what did Ed Sullivan really feel about the Beatles? And why did he decide to host them in his show? All these questions will be answered in today's video. Stay tuned! The publicity generated from an appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show was enough for most talent to say yes, but the Beatles would only agree to appear if the show covered their travel expenses and paid them a $10,000 fee, which was huge then. Sullivan and his producers agreed, but only if the Beatles would commit to making 3 appearances. They had a deal. Sullivan could have only agreed to that deal because he felt bringing the Beatles to perform in the United States would be greatly accepted by the American population. So how did Sullivan get to know the Beatles? On October 31st, 1963, Sullivan and his wife were at the London airport. It was an unusually busy day at the airport, with the Prime Minister due to fly out, and contestants for the Miss World contest, being held that year in London, arriving. Although the city was experiencing a heavy rainstorm that day, more than 1,500 youngsters lined the rooftop gardens of the Queen's building and others congregated on the ground. Sullivan asked what all the commotion was about and was informed that it was for the Beatles, who were returning from a tour of Sweden. He replied, "Who the hell are the Beatles?" Sullivan was told that the Beatles were a well-known pop group. Although Sullivan would later claim that the incident caused him to immediately inquire into booking the Beatles on his show, there is actually a background story to that. Let's see other things that contributed to Sullivan booking the Beatles on his show. In 1963, the Beatles were gaining coverage in the British press and were receiving tremendous radio and television exposure. But their big breakthrough was a widely watched and well-publicized television appearance on Val Parnell's Sunday Night at the London Palladium, which was televised throughout the UK during primetime Sunday evening and was the British equivalent of The Ed Sullivan Show. The Beatles headlined the October 13, 1963 Palladium show, which was seen by more than 15 million people. The bedlam caused by the group both inside and outside the theater caught the attention of the British news editors, who elevated the Beatles from a successful entertainment act to a national news phenomenon. The Daily Mirror described the hysteria as Beatlemania. The term stuck. The Beatles' triumphant Palladium appearance was quickly followed by the October 31st airport reception witnessed by Sullivan and their playing before high society at the Royal Command performance, also known as the Royal Variety Show. Their presence on the 4th of November 1963 show drew more attention than the arrival of the royal family. The Beatles, who were 7th on the bill of 19 acts, impressed the upscale crowd with their songs. Peter Pritchard, a London theatrical agent who was also employed by Sullivan as his European talent coordinator, knew Beatles manager Brian Epstein. Richard contacted Brian and told him to try to get the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and even offered to negotiate a deal with Sullivan for Epstein. But Brian said that he would rather handle the negotiations himself. This brought him to New York. Before Brian's arrival, Pritchard called Sullivan and gave him a report on the Royal Variety Show. Pritchard mentioned the tremendous response the Beatles received and recommended that Sullivan book the Beatles for his show. Sullivan, remembering the large crowd at London Airport, was interested, but needed an angle to promote the group. Pritchard informed Sullivan that the Beatles were the first long-haired boys to be invited to appear before the Queen of England. That convinced Sullivan to consider the group for his show. Epstein met with Sullivan at his suite at the Delmonico Hotel on Monday, November 11th. This was followed by a 5 p.m. dinner meeting the next day at the Delmonico Hotel's restaurant. The initial meeting was apparently attended only by Epstein and Sullivan. They tentatively agreed that the Beatles would appear on Sullivan's February 9, 1964 show live from New York, broadcast live from the Deauville Hotel in Miami Beach. Bob Precht, Sullivan's son-in-law and producer, was asked to attend the second meeting, during which the deal was finalized. Upon his arrival at the Delmonico, Precht was introduced to Epstein and was told by Sullivan that the manager had a great group of youngsters who were going to be really big. For Sullivan to describe the Beatles as something really big means that he felt really positive about these youngsters. Although Sullivan paid up to $10,000 for a single performance, he offered Brian $3,500 for each show. He agreed to pay the group's transportation and lodging. Realizing the importance of having his boys on The Sullivan Show, Brian agreed to the deal, provided the Beatles received top billing. Precht suggested that in addition to the 2 live programs, the Beatles should tape a performance for altering broadcast. The parties agreed on a payment of $3,000 for the tape segment, thus bringing the total for the 3 shows to $10,000. As was often the case with Epstein's negotiations, the deal was then sealed with a handshake. After leaving the meeting, Precht began having second thoughts about featuring the unknown British band on the show and called Sullivan at his suite to voice his concerns. Sullivan assured him that he felt it was worth the investment, and that ended the matter. The decision had been made. Sullivan later told the New York Times, "I made up my mind that this was the same sort of mass hit hysteria that had characterized the Elvis Presley days." On December 10, 1963, Sullivan saw a 4-minute story on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Shortly after the program ended, Sullivan called Cronkite to ask him if he knew about those bugs or whatever they call themselves. His inability to remember the group's name was typical Sullivan. Those bugs were still virtually unknown in America, but Sullivan sensed that was about to change. After all, if Cronkite deemed the Beatles newsworthy, America would soon catch on. 3 days later, CBS issued a press release announcing that the Beatles, a widely popular quartet of English recording stars, will make their first trip to the United States February 7th for the American television debut on The Ed Sullivan Show Sunday, February 9th and 16th. In addition to prompting CBS to begin promotion of the Beatles' upcoming appearance on The Sullivan Show, Cronkite's decision to broadcast the Beatles' story on December 10th set forth a domino effect, causing Beatlemania to explode in America nearly 3 weeks ahead of schedule. The Beatles began to grow massively in popularity in America, but something happened that almost made Ed Sullivan cancel the February 9th show where the Beatles were to perform. Sullivan had always felt positive in regards to bringing the youngsters to perform in America. So what happened? Ed Sullivan rival Jack Parr, who was a television personality, pulled a coup by broadcasting a filmed performance of the group on his NBC show over a month before their scheduled Sullivan Show appearance on CBS. Parr had seen the group in London at the Royal Variety Show on November 4th. He purchased the film from the BBC, including shots of screaming girls and the Beatles performing "She Loves You." Epstein was furious with the BBC for selling the Beatles' performance to a rival of Sullivan, and worried that Sullivan would be angry. Epstein had promised Sullivan the first and exclusive American television appearances of the Beatles. Epstein threatened to cancel the Beatles' radio shows on the BBC if action was not taken. The BBC tried to rescind its licensing of the film, but Parr refused to budge. Sullivan was furious and phoned Pritchard to cancel the Beatles. Fortunately, Pritchard decided to wait a few days before calling Epstein. Sullivan cooled off when he realized what a hot ticket the Beatles were becoming, and canceled his cancellation before Epstein ever knew. Sullivan decided to keep the show because he knew the show was going to be a massive hit. Though forking over travel expenses and an appearance fee wasn't the norm for the Ed Sullivan Show, it ended up being a great deal for the program, and proof that Beatlemania was just as thriving in America as it was in the UK. It's been estimated that close to 74 million people, which was about 40% of the country's population at that time, tuned in to watch the Beatles play. While more than a third of America's population witnessed history in the making the night the Beatles appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, 728 very lucky individuals got to see it all go down live as part of the show's audience. And when we say very lucky, I mean it, because the program received a record-setting 50,000 requests for tickets to the show. This really showed how great the show turned out to be. The excitement began shortly after 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with Sullivan's famous introduction. Now, yesterday and today, our theater's been jammed with newspapermen and hundreds of photographers from all over the nation, and these veterans agreed with me that the city never has the excitement stirred by these youngsters from Liverpool, who call themselves the Beatles. Now tonight, you're gonna twice be entertained by them. Right now, and again in the second half of our show. Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles. Let's bring them on. The rest of the show became something that even in the years to come, people that witnessed the show still call an amazing experience. That will be all for today's video. Thank you for staying tuned.